build opportunities to listen and learn together. So, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Jillian, for being here. I know this is an especially busy time for you, given that you're in the middle of the re-election process.
But look at all these potential voters.
Right. So we particularly appreciate your time given that. So just a quick introduction of Jillian. She is a 2003 graduate of Duke. She's originally from Virginia. Moved here to attend Duke and has been part of the community since then. She's an organizer, an advocate for economic and environmental justice. She's a strong proponent for broadening democratic participation, kind of like what Gunther alluded to. She's an organizer, and she strongly believes in equitable development for all of Durham citizens. She co-founded in 2014 Durham for All, a nonprofit organization here. She is active on several boards and organizations here in Durham, and in her copious spare time, she also manages to be a board game designer, which I think is really cool. She is working on this board game right now on communitarian organizations that's set in a future Appalachia. So I am certainly looking forward to that when it's in.
Let's hope.
Yes.
So it will one day be available.
And just a little bit of background on the participatory budgeting. As I was thinking about my course for this fall, I wanted to incorporate participatory budgeting given the focus of my class on civic engagement and participation, and I sort of reached out to Jillian because of the role that she played in really spearheading this initiative at the city. And Durham is one of the few cities in the South, a handful of cities in the South that have participatory budgeting, and even fewer in our country that have a substantial amount of funding allocated for participatory budgeting. Most other cities allocate nominal amounts, which is not the case for Durham, which is wonderful. Part of my motivation for asking Jillian if she would come talk to us is because of the role she played in spearheading this initiative and envisioning it and implementing it, and also in the work that was done to sort of incorporate and amplify the voices of many citizens that are often not heard from. So without further ado, I present Jillian Johnson, our Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. So I'm going to come up to this podium because some people who couldn't be here today asked for this to be recorded. So I'm going to stand here somewhat awkwardly and talk at you like it's a lecture, but I'm really excited about having more of a dialogue, and I might, during Q&A, come back and sit down with that. Okay, great. So thank you all again so much for inviting me to be here with you today and to talk about participatory budgeting, which I'm going to abbreviate PB because those words are very long. So PB is one of the projects that I came into City Council most excited about implementing in Durham. And we have had an amazing success over the last couple of years in implementing a really exciting and robust process that met a lot of my goals personally, the goals of the council, and the city's goals for the program. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the policy and the politics of bringing PB to Durham. And then we can have a little bit of a question and answer about anything that comes up that you're interested in learning more about. So the idea for PB first came into awareness in the City of Durham back in 2016, and it was through a campaign run by our staff labor union, UE150, Black Youth Project, and a couple of other organizations who came to the city asking for a people's budget. The impetus for this was the city building a new police station, which was predicted to cost around $70 to $80 million. There was some concern in the community around that level of investment in policing and into a new police station, and questions, these activist groups were bringing up questions of what our priorities are as a community, where we should be investing, and how do we get more community input into the process of deciding how the city spends their money. So participatory budgeting was something that that those groups were asking for, that I had heard of but hadn't known that much about prior to that conversation. So later that year, in the summer of 2016, I went and got trained in PB. I went to a conference called Common Bound, which is a really great conference if any of you ever had the opportunity to go. It's about social and solidarity economics. It takes place every other year in Buffalo, New York, which is a really interesting city. And there were some people from a national organization that helps cities implement PB doing a whole day training. So I went, I got trained, and I fell in love with this process. And committed myself at that meeting to bringing it back to Durham. The political piece of that, right, then gets tricky because I'm a brand new council member. I was elected in 2015, and now I'm saying to council members with a lot more experience, who are a lot older than me, who've been doing budgets for a lot longer, hey, let's do this brand new crazy thing and get everybody involved in making budget decisions. So unsurprisingly, there was some pushback to that back in the city council and also city staff. So Durham has a council manager form of government where our city manager is hired by the city council to run our administration. So the city manager is actually a very powerful individual in government, and he's unelected. The accountability trail is, right, we hire him, y'all elect us, and so we are in charge of holding the city manager accountable. But our city manager is great. He has a lot of great ideas, but he's been in government for a long time, and he has, specific ideas about how things should be run. This was a big new idea. It was going to be a lot of work for his staff. It was kind of throwing a wrench into how we've done things in the past. Similar issues from council members. Why would we do this? Our budget process is fine. We don't need this, was most of the pushback that I got. What we're doing now is okay. Why don't we do something different? Of course, I was arguing that an opportunity to broaden and expand our democracy was something that we really should take, and that the opportunity to get more people involved in a broad civic engagement process would lead to some exciting positive outcomes, both in the current moment and down the road. So I made that argument to the city council, and then I decided to go out and make that argument to the community. So I scheduled meetings with community organizations, with city boards and commissions, with just prominent community members working in different social issues, and pitched PB. I actually made up a little PowerPoint presentation with little characters that were like, here's the top 7 reasons that we should do PB. I can't remember all of them. One of them had a picture of Obama, which was supposed to get everybody Obama. But the biggest reasons for me were an opportunity to engage people who cannot typically engage in municipal elections. So that's people who don't have citizenship, people who have been disenfranchised due to being convicted of a felony or on probation or parole, and people under 18. Participatory budgeting allowed all those people to actually vote in a way that was meaningful in a city process, and that was an opportunity that a lot of people had never had. We were able to go into high schools and even middle schools and engage kids. There were some teachers who worked PB into their curriculum, especially history and civics teachers and DPS who were able to do that. We had youth members on our steering committee who were spreading the word in their schools and in youth organizations. And we had a monolingual Spanish language committee that was doing outreach in the immigrant Latino community. I've had several immigrants come up to me after the process and say, especially people who came here as children, this was the first time they ever got to vote in anything. And that experience was really meaningful for them, actually being able to make a decision that has an impact on the place that they live. So after all of this outreach, going out to the community and meeting lots of people and trying to get people excited about PB, we had a new election. And the community members that I've been engaging with over the course of the last year decided to make this an election issue. Whether or not you supported a participatory budgeting process was included in candidate questionnaires, was asked of people at candidate forums, and so residents who were committed to bringing this process to Durham actually made sure that the new people who were coming into council had heard about it and were supportive about it. So we elected several new council members who were excited about participatory budgeting, and that's what gave me the votes that I needed to actually pass the process. We have 6 council members and the mayor. The mayor votes with us, so you need 4 votes to pass something, and we passed PB with 5 votes. The other big decision that we had to make was how much money to put into the process, and that also involved a lot of coalition building and collaboration and thinking and talking about, you know, the impact of that spending on council and with the community. The other city in North Carolina that has done PB is Greensboro, and Greensboro put a very small amount of money into their pot. Small by municipal standards, it was $500,000, which is like, that's not, I would love $500,000, but from a city spending perspective, $500,000, you can't do that much. It was divided up into 5 wards, so each ward really only had $100,000 to work with, and their engagement was very low. They had about 2,000 people to vote in their first couple of years, and would go on to set a goal of 10,000 voters in Durham's first year. So I knew, and my council colleagues knew, that we needed a bigger number to really make people feel like it was worth engaging, like it was worth their time and energy, that the money that was being put into this process could actually make a real difference in their community. I initially proposed $2.5 million, and here's a secret that's no longer going to be secret. I didn't think I would get that much money. I was aiming high. Like, you don't negotiate with yourself before you put out a proposal, right? You aim high, and then people will talk you down. We ended up getting $2.4 million into the process, and divided up among the 3 wards. So each ward had $800,000 worth of projects that they could vote on. And that proved to be enough of an incentive to really excite people and get them engaged, because we met our 10,000 voter goal. We had over 500 people submit ideas. We had over 100 people serve as budget delegates. And these are the people in the process that take the ideas and turn them into proposals. So from a, let's add play equipment to this park, to an actual proposal with specific play equipment, how much everything will cost, future maintenance, cost predictions, and why this project is important. The budget delegates do all of that work. So after those 2 votes on actually, you know, starting the process and the $2.4 million, I felt like I, you know, won this exciting thing. But in really, it's just the beginning. Like, now it's like, okay, now the actual work can start to implement this policy. Because we knew we wanted a really robust and effective process, we decided to hire full-time staff to work on PB in the City of Durham. So we created 2 permanent jobs in our budget department that are focused on PB. After hiring those people, we appointed a 15-member steering committee from members of the community. We got 40-some applications for that committee, which was really exciting to see the amount of interest in the community about that. And we appointed 15 people, 5 from each of the 3 wards, and 2 youth members to oversee the process. So we don't have to. PB is designed intentionally to be very community driven. So we wanted all of the important decisions, after we had created the framework, to be made by community members and to be made by people who would actually be engaging in the process themselves. So we kind of turned the process over to the steering committee at that point, though my council colleague Javier Caballero and I were appointed as liaisons, so we have stayed engaged over the course of the process with the steering committee and with budget delegates. And then our 2 staff members and our budget director started getting down to work on putting together what the process would look like, developing outreach strategies, starting a collaboration with the school district and with some other organizations to help us with get out the vote efforts. And then we put out the call for ideas, developed those ideas and projects, and then had everybody vote. This process would not have been as successful as it was without the engagement, the full engagement of our city staff. And that's something that's really tricky to get as you're thinking about, like, we're a leadership body, right? We're setting policy, but in order for that policy to really be implemented effectively, we have to have the buy-in of the people who are actually implementing it. I come from nonprofit work, and so I'm very used to being an implementer. And so I had to consciously, like, tell myself to step back and let staff do this work, and not be that, you know, sort of hovery, like, micromanager, annoying person who people hate, right? To trust that the staff knows what they're doing and that they're going to implement this well. and to be, you know, the advisor in the background, kind of making sure that everything's going well. And they did an incredible job, and that's to the credit of our city manager, Tom Bonfield, and our budget director, Jillian Johnson, and our PB staff, Andrew Holland and Robin Baker, who really put a lot of time and energy and work into this. And that's, so Robin and Andrew were hired to work on PB, but Tom and Bertha were initially not excited about it. They saw it as a huge new burden on staff and on the city to do this kind of work. And honestly, they were both very nervous about how this would work and whether the city could take it on. Our mayor, Steve Schul, has admitted recently at candidate forums that at first he was a skeptic about PB, wasn't sure that it would work, wasn't sure that it would be an effective way to get the kind of community engagement that we were looking for, and it has now a 100% convert and loves PB. The thing that he loved the most about it was the committee work that was happening. So for the course of the several months that the budget delegates were turning project ideas and proposals, pretty much every night of the week there was a project committee meeting at City Hall. Just ordinary residents taking their time to come in and talk to city staff and work with city staff and figure out how to make these different projects happen for their community. So that was really exciting, and in the end, we had an amazing year. The way our schedule works is that we are implementing a PB process every other year, and in between years, we have an implementation and an evaluation period. What we learned from studying other processes is that a lot of PB cities get a lot of projects voted on, but they don't always get implemented. And so we wanted to intentionally take some time to allow our staff to think about implementation and work on actually getting projects on the ground. Another piece, especially after this first year, was of course we want to take the time to evaluate how things went and figure out what changes, what shifts we need to make the process even better for our next year. So that's what's happening now. We've hired some outside evaluators. The North Carolina Central MPA, Masters in Public Administration program, is going to bring in their students to serve as evaluators, and they're going to survey everyone who is involved in PB and ask them about their experience and what they think could be done better. They're also going to survey our staff internally and our steering committee and get their ideas, and then they'll bring recommendations to the council before we start another year to figure out different things that we can do the next year. We've also got the implementation side happening at the same time, so folks from Parks and Rec and Public Works and our Public Art Committee looking at the projects that got approved and trying to figure out what are the next steps for implementation. And we have a goal of implementing 50% of the projects within the first year and 100% within 3 years. So we'll be moving in that direction too. The final thing I want to talk to you about is how we used a race equity lens and worked race equity into the process from the beginning. So that was a priority for the council and from our administration, that we ensure that we are not just, that these projects were going to communities that really needed the investment. There were concerns that people who find it more easy to participate, white people, people with access to wealth, would be more likely to participate, more likely to vote, and that those projects would then be more likely to go into those higher income, mostly white communities, and that would then reproduce the racial inequity that we know cities and governments have been producing for a long time, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. So we had a very intentional process of making sure that all of our projects promoted equity, and we did that by using an equity scorecard and looking at every project and figuring out whether this project met a few key criteria. One was, does it repair past harms? Two was that does it serve vulnerable or marginalized communities? So every project went through equity scoring, and any project that didn't have a strong equity score was removed from the process. We also dedicated the vast majority of our outreach efforts to low-income communities and communities of color. Our staff hosted dozens of outreach events, and the vast majority of those were in those communities where we knew that people were going to be less likely to engage. And so we did idea collection events and voting events in lots of low-income areas of Durham, and we're able to make sure that our numbers reflected our community by investing in that outreach. We knew that we weren't going to, even if we didn't do any, face-to-face outreach or, set up tables outside of grocery stores or schools in any of our like higher income, mostly white communities, that those people were going to vote because those people already have access to the process in a way that marginalized people don't. What we found was that we still had trouble getting to parity, that we still had more upper income and more white people participate than lower income people and people of color, even with all of our outreach efforts going to the people we knew would be hardest to reach. So that's something we're going to think about more in our evaluation process. Do we need more outreach to happen? Do we need different ways of voting? The voting that we did, people could vote online or they could vote with paper ballots at a pop-up voting site or at their school or at their workplace, depending on who we were working with. And we found that the majority of our people of color who voted on paper ballots. So they were being canvassed or being, Durham Public Schools are 80% students of color. So we got a lot of votes from DPS. So that was a really important consideration for us when thinking about how to design the process. I was able to travel to Barcelona late last year. I was invited to talk about our PB process at an international conference about participatory democracy. And a couple of the projects all of the projects were thinking about equity and marginalized communities within their own context. My favorite was a PB process for migrant workers in Singapore. And they had, and Singapore has a lot of Southeast Asian immigrant workers who were not being engaged in their community's process. And so they created a PB process that was just for them. And migrant workers actually, they did weighted voting. Migrant workers had double the votes. That was something that was proposed by some community members. We decided not to do that, to not give like people of different demographics different levels of voting, like different levels of weight in the process. But we did want to make sure that equity was at the forefront of all of our conversations, and that as much as possible we were making sure these investments were going in the communities that had historically been disinvested. I can't say for sure how well we did. We're still waiting for those evaluation results to come through. But I think that our process was far better than it would have been without thinking about those things on the front end and having that level of consistent concern for equity issues. So I'm going to stop talking before I bore you all to tears. I would love to take questions or just have a conversation about what y'all think. Yeah, let me go to the back first.
I was wondering, so for the budget delegates, what type of capacity building or training might they have received so that they could put together quality proposals that kind of met the specifications?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the question was for what kind of training and capacity building did budget delegates get for putting together their proposals? So we had a couple of budget delegate trainings right at the beginning of the process where we brought people in and explained PB, and they were able to meet city staff and talk to them about their processes for whichever committee they were going to join. So we had committees for different types of projects like Parks and Rec, Arts and Culture, Infrastructure, those sorts of things. And so then people met with the relevant city staff for those departments, and they met with them over the period of time so that they were always being mentored and coached by city staff and putting together their policies. And that was really effective. We made an internal city staff PB committee, and they also met on their own to talk about how the projects were going and working with residents. And we got a lot of staff who were really excited about doing that sort of resident engagement. You definitely have to have some sort of training with PB delegates. Most of, there's slate people who are excited about their community. I don't know anything about how much playground equipment costs, or how much it costs to put up a bus shelter. So it's a real opportunity for people to learn how the city works internally. And what we're hoping is that the more people who know that, the more understanding there will be about things like, why is this sidewalk taking 2 years to build? Or, why can't we replace all of these storm drains in a month without shutting down traffic? For some of the complaints and concerns and inconveniences that city processes cause residents, that the more residents who are engaged in that process and can kind of explain it to other people and feel more connected, that's a good public outreach tool for the work that we're trying to do. Yeah.
I was wondering if the PB process exposed any like previously unconsidered needs within the community, and so if you could describe what they were.
Yeah, thanks. So the question is whether the PB process exposed any undiscovered needs in the community. I would say yes, a lot of them. And in some cities, even when projects don't win, they try to, the city might still try to fund them with other pots of money. We had several projects that we were really excited about that didn't win. A specific example that I'll talk about is the Durham Public Schools project that was funded. So initially that project was proposed by, I believe, a DPS parent to provide more laptops in the schools. And so that project went to a budget delegate team, and they got in touch with Durham Public Schools, and what the school administrator said was, actually laptops aren't that hard for us to get. We have Chromebooks, we have iPads, we get donations all the time. What we really need is projectors, because a lot of the projectors in the schools were really older, were failing, and some schools didn't have one at all. So that process was kind of retooled based on working with the school district towards buying projectors and screens and smart boards and those kind of bigger ticket technology items for DPS. So that was a need that we existed, that we were able to successfully fund. One of the things that's happening now with that project is there's a big conversation with our staff and with DPS about where that technology should go. And that's also become an equity question, because some of the schools are more well-funded than others, some have more active PTAs with more fundraising capacity. So how do we make sure that the highest need schools get that equipment? And also we have to divide it up equally by ward, because that was on the ballot. So we're trying to sort through all of those questions right now. Yeah, I'm just gonna go around if that's okay.
So when the budget split up into wards, are those wards just like 5 different projects citywide, or are they split up in certain categories or in certain regions of the city?
Yeah, so the question is about the wards and the geographic distribution of wards and projects in the city. So the wards are city determined. I think actually probably the state drew them at some point. There's 3 wards in the city of Durham, and they're like our political divisions. So when you vote for a city council member from one of the 3, like there are 3 wards, and city council, we elect one from each ward. They have to live in the ward. So that's where we got that map. We ended up using that map really for convenience reasons. We don't think it's the best way to divide up the city for PD, but we knew that figuring out any other way to divide up the city was going to take a lot of time and energy and be controversial, and we wanted to just run the pilot and not have to, not spend several months figuring out that system. We assigned an equal amount of money to each ward, but there are different numbers of projects in each ward depending on how expensive they were. And you voted in the ward that you lived in, and you could vote for projects until you ran out of money. So if you voted for 2 or 3 really expensive projects, then you might only get to those 2 votes. But if you voted for cheaper projects, then you might be able to vote for 5 or 6. I'm not sure how many won on the ballot in each ward, but I know the numbers are different. We also had a lot more voters in one of the wards than in the other 2. Ward 1 has more of like the central city and downtown residents, and a lot of like newer, younger people who are just more likely to be excited about this sort of a process. So we got a lot more votes in Ward 1 than we did in 2 and 3, which are older, more established areas of the city and more suburban. So a little bit harder to reach out to, harder to connect with. Yeah.
I have a question about more like standing items on the budget. So you talked a lot about new projects. I'm wondering the extent to which PB can influence just standing items. I have a particular interest in like the jail, the Durham jail. So, and I know that that's just a constant expense. Yeah. But it may go up and down, depending on the needs in the jail, and something that is probably not understood well by most people either.
Right. Yeah, so the question is about standing budget items and can PB influence them. So, and the jail. So first, the jail's run by the county. So the city doesn't actually have any spending or oversight or authority over the jail. But we do have a lot of what we call CIP, capital improvement projects, in a long-term plan that we're implementing year by year. Some of it's funded, so like we've already figured out how we're going to pay for it. Some of it is kind of outlying things where we're hoping to figure out money to pay for it over time, and that's through borrowing, and we have a small piece of our tax rate that goes to capital projects, stuff like that. What we decided to do was to eliminate any PB project that was in the near-term CIP. So anything that the city was already planning to fund to implement was not going to be, we weren't going to put on a PB ballot because it's already in the pipeline. So part of working with the city staff was, part of that vetting process was taking anything out, taking any ideas out that were already on the list. Things that were in the far out CIP, like unfunded CIP, could go on the list, but I'm not sure any did. Most of our capital projects are going to be much bigger than $2.4 million. Like we have a lot of parks improvements that are pretty big, like building a bunch of new soccer fields out in the eastern part of the county, or there's an aquatic center that we're hoping to build at some point in the next probably 10 years. So most of the things on that CIP plan would be too big for a PB. But we did make sure that we weren't overlapping while we were deciding what to do. Yeah.
So those under 18 were allowed to vote. Was there any opportunities for them to like get involved in facilitating the participatory budgeting process?
Yeah, there was. So the question is about youth voting and participation. So we collaborated with our city and county office on youth to bring youth into the process from the beginning. So we had 2 youth members on our steering committee. We set the voting age was 13, and we had a youth idea collection session that they hosted, where we got 50 ideas from young people from 13 to 18. I actually got a really good idea from a 13-year-old about figuring out something different to do with a field by a rec center that he went to all the time. So that was really exciting to be able to engage students and youth in that way in the idea collection process. You could serve as budget delegates. I'm not sure any did, other than the 2 who were already on our steering committee, 2 high school students. And then we did the youth outreach with the vote. So we were able to bring youth into the process more holistically, and we did want to make sure that we did that. My son was 12 at the time of the vote, so he like just missed the cutoff, and he was very angry at me. But it was really exciting to go out to the community and talk to kids and be like, you get to vote, and your vote makes a difference. And collaborate closely with Durham Public Schools to make voting a part of the school day. We had a goal of making sure that every kid in a DPS school had the opportunity to vote at school. We ran into some roadblocks because the school district and we didn't communicate well enough around the timing. So we had planned for May to be vote month, but May is also when DPS is wrapping up the year and they have end of grade testing, and everyone is kind of in a panic through the month of May about their getting all the kids ready for the test. So that is something that we're going to change for the next year. We're going to have voting in April instead of in May, so that we don't stress out our school system and our teachers quite as much. But we were able to get some teachers who brought PD curriculum into their classrooms and got their kids engaged. So we got a lot of youth votes, which was really great. Let's go to the back in there.
Yes, thank you. I had 2 quick questions. One was just in terms of your role and the scope of this project in pilot. How much was this your work full time, and what types of organization did you have to set some of these goals? Like, who were you having to either work with, or did you have full autonomy? And then the second piece of that was just in terms of how you sourced your scorecard with the diversity and equity lens. Did you just kind of tap your community and gather information, or go with one other organization's scorecard, or how did you get that?
Thank you. So let me answer the second question first. So the second question is about how we developed our equity scorecard. We had a consultant who works for a nonprofit that implements PB around the country. And so we got a lot of materials from them, including some of the materials that we used to write our equity scorecard. So they were super helpful, and they also helped Greensboro start their process. The members of that nonprofit have worked in PD in New York and Chicago and all over the country. We're hoping that now that we have 2 trained staff people and a lot of community engagement, that we won't need to hire them again. We may end up consulting with them a little bit just if we hit tricky points, but they were incredibly helpful. It's a group called Our City, Our Voice, and highly recommend them, and that was super helpful. First question was about my process and collaboration of figuring out how everything was going to look. Is that how the process was going to work?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
sort of, yeah, I guess the process, and then also how you were setting those goals, like in terms of trying to get certain parity or equity, or
Right.
your methods for outreach.
Right.
Who were you having to work with to do that, or did you have the autonomy, and what was that decision making and setting
Yeah.
process like?
Yeah. So about decision making and who I worked with and autonomy.
Yeah.
No, I did not have autonomy. I have to get, so anything that I want to do, I have to get 3 other council members at least to agree. And so that involves a lot of collaboration and cooperation up front to get to some sort of draft that people can be excited about and agree with. The initial framing for the process came out of City Council, and I worked with other council members to kind of develop like a prospectus to figure out what kinds of decisions we wanted each group in the PB ecosystem to be able to make. So what decisions are going to be made by City Council members? What decisions are going to be made by City staff? What decisions are going to be made by the steering committee? That was kind of how we divided them up. Questions around like, so the City Council made decisions like who's going to be on the steering committee? How much funding is going to be available? What's the timeline for the process? When's voting going to happen? Those sorts of like bigger picture questions. The steering committee made decisions about how do we decide how we do outreach? So like overall, like broad outreach strategy of who's going to implement the outreach. So we had a small stipend for some of the budget delegates. They decided which budget delegates were going to be picked to work with the project. And then staff made decisions like final vetting of projects. Is this feasible? Can we implement it? If not, if yes, why? If not, why not? And staff had the right to say, this project can't be done, we're not putting it on the ballot. We only wanted things on the ballot that we could actually do, because we're trying to build trust. And so having things that then fail erodes that. So staff had pretty significant authority over what they thought was doable. We also had a legal team that vetted the projects for whether the city could legally within our authority implement a project. And there were a couple of projects that were eliminated for legal reasons where we felt like the city we didn't have a strong enough legal authorization to do a thing as a public benefit, that it felt more like a private benefit to a particular organization or group or something like that. So we kind of laid out the decision-making structure. City Council voted on it, and then staff and the steering committee were empowered by that to make the choices within their frameworks. Sure, yeah.
So this is really exciting.
Thank you.
We started out talking about the initial issue with building a police station.
Yeah.
$7 million.
Yeah.
Have you looked at all about in the future? I mean, if you have $2.4 million, everyone gets some of that. But what oftentimes budgeting is about, well, we can only do this or that. And when you reach those trade-offs, we might talk about including participatory budgeting in those kind of larger budget issues where you can't simply give everyone something.
So like having community input on budget questions outside of PB.
Right.
Right. So not as such. We haven't talked about using like a voting process, a PB related process, to get community impact on other budget decisions. But we do have some processes whereby we get community impact on the whole budget. So $2.4 million is like the most PB, it's like the biggest per capita PB project of any city in the country, but it's like less than 0.5% of the budget for that year. So 99.5% of the budget is being decided on by city council, city staff. Right. We have a couple of mechanisms for getting community input. One is every year during budget season we have a series of public hearings, and people can come in and tell us their budget priorities. What's not entirely good about that system is that by the time we have the hearings, a lot of the budget's already been determined. We have a budget, one of them is earlier in the process, I think it's March, And at that point, things are still a little bit more flexible, but all of the departments have already put in their new initiatives request to the city manager. And if it's just a request from a resident not coming through a city department that's prepared to work on it, it's unlikely to make it into the budget. And then we have a budget hearing 2 weeks before we pass the budget. At this point, like, nothing's gonna happen. So what I tell people who really want to impact the budget, what we mostly get at public hearings is people who want to complain, which is their right, and I fully support public complaining. I do it a lot, but you can't really have an impact that way. So what I tell people who come to me with budget questions is, you really want to get something working in the budget, is you need to work with city staff in whatever department is assigned to do the work that you're thinking about doing, and work with them to get them to come up, co-govern with them, come up with a proposal. So that proposal goes to the city manager, and then it comes to us. And then it's much easier for us to be like, wow, look at this great proposal from our staff, you know. We've had residents do that with tree planting, and we've had residents do that with bike lanes. Work with the departments to get a proposal through, and that's been really effective. That kind of happens informally. And then we have so in the off years that we're not doing PD, and in the year before we did PD, we implemented a program called Community Conversations, where we partnered with the county and the school board to do broad community engagement during budget season in like kind of a facilitated roundtable format. So we had a couple big questions, went to a school gym, set up little roundtables, invited everyone to come, and then asked groups of questions, and did this sort of focusing exercise where you ask everyone to answer the question, kind of cluster ideas into big themes, and then report back the big themes to the whole group. And then the city staff were able to collect all of those themes and use that to engage their budget process of thinking and conversations. So the public hearings, the community conversations, having residents work directly with staff to do some co-governance. And we also have the Citizens Advisory Committee on the CIP, on the capital improvement projects, that we don't appoint. It's just a group of people that the budget department appoints each year to get community feedback on those long-term CIP items. So, where should this trail be? Should it be next year? Should it be 2 years from now? Like answering those questions. Yeah, sure.
You mentioned how in a lot of these TV programs, there's a problem with implementing the projects that get proposed. And you also mentioned all the extra work you're doing to make sure the community and like even marginalized people were getting involved in the PB program. But I was wondering if there was anything that was done or any way to pull in the community into that implementation process.
Yeah.
So that that part they have to say too.
Yeah, definitely. So we absolutely want to pull communities into implementation, especially when there are community-based projects like in specific neighborhoods. And that's part of building like the excitement and the civic engagement piece is like people they see something on a ballot, they get to vote on it, and then they actually get to see it implemented and participate in that implementation. So yes, and this year we're hoping to engage residents in helping with implementation. There's one project I know that's kind of moving forward. It was putting some historical markers on Fayetteville Street. So we have a resident committee called the Culture Advisory Board and a subcommittee called the Public Art Committee. That's about 20-some, maybe 30 residents who are now working to help implement those projects because they're kind of in that wheelhouse. And so hopefully we'll have, as we implement other projects, we'll have city boards and commissions with residents on them that can help do that, or if it's a community project in a neighborhood park, be able to bring in community members in that community to like help inform the implementation. So yes, that's definitely a piece of the puzzle. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, it's a really compelling model, but problem with sometimes with voting is that when people vote, it's as if that's their civic responsibility and it ends there, rather than really changing the whole relationship to the process.
Right.
And I guess I'm wondering, because it's a competitive process, for those, what have you observed about trying to sustain the goodwill, intention, trust for those projects that were not selected?
Yeah.
And it took probably a lot of people in power to get into the form they are.
Yep.
And it strikes me as being a beautiful thing, but also like poignant because like they didn't get it, and then
Right.
people feel like voting only matters if you win,
Mhm.
which a lot of people do,
Mhm.
or participating only matters if you get your way.
Mhm.
Then it's harder to sustain that
Yeah.
energy. So what have you done to try to nurture that
Yeah.
that continued engagement? It's hard.
It's hard, and that's definitely a concern we have, that people whose projects didn't win will be disaffected and feel disempowered and not want to participate. Luckily, a lot of projects did win, so it wasn't like you vote on one thing. Like I might have voted on 6 projects and like 4 of them won. So
Nice.
most people got something that they voted for. The bigger problem we have had is people who proposed projects and people who propose projects like specific to an organization that they're a part of or like a cause that they care about, and those projects not winning or not even making them onto the ballot. And people feeling and people claiming that the process was unfair or somehow we didn't meet our goals because their project that they were invested in didn't make it onto the ballot. And so we've gotten some concerns and complaints from people about that, which I think overall the concerns aren't fair. I think the process did go really well and that it met our goals, and that their concerns are mostly based in disappointment about their project not being chosen for whatever reason. But I am concerned about that energy in the process overall from projects that don't get chosen, and what that if that has the ability to kind of like have a like a little necrotic spot that grows and makes the process feel less good for people, less empowering. So we have not figured out how to deal with that yet. One thing that we want to do better in our next cycle is communication between idea submitters through the process. A lot of people, what we did this year was everything was on this website. You had to go to the website and check. So if you submitted an idea, no one who submitted an idea got any kind of like notification or feedback about where their idea was in the process unless they went to the website and looked it up. So we want to figure out a way to keep people engaged more around like where their idea is in the process, and if your idea gets cut, here's why. So that there's a little bit more transparency about why those decisions get made, even if people aren't happy with the decision, then at least they have some reasoning. Yeah.
Following that, I was wondering if the criteria are clearly explained so that people, when they're formulating the projects, they already know what are going to be the key considerations.
Yeah.
And what are those, if you can point out, what are the criteria?
Yeah, so the criteria were that it had to cost between $50,000 and $800,000, that it had to be legal for the city to do, that it had to be on city or other public property, or we initially had a criteria that it had to be on city property, then we expanded it to city or like a partnering private agency or public agency. So you could do something on county property if the county agreed. You could do something on nonprofit property if they agreed, but there had to be alignment there, or it wouldn't go on the ballot. And it had to advance equity, and so then we had the equity criteria. So yes, I think we tried to define what was going to be approved. I think some of the criteria were more clear than others. Like I don't think a lot of people understood the equity criteria or why their projects would be eliminated for low equity scores. So that's something that we need to do better in the next year. And there were some projects that were submitted by like private businesses that were primarily for private benefit. And I think it should have been clear that wasn't what PB was about, but apparently some people thought they could use this process to get people to vote to like renovate their privately owned buildings, that kind of thing.
Are the criteria, for example, clearly specifying who the beneficiaries are?
Right, so yes, it has to be for public benefit, and that's also part of the city's legal criteria. The city can only legally implement things for the public benefit. So we can't just give public money to some guy who wants a new building, right? But we can give public money to a nonprofit to build a community garden that's going to broadly serve, a neighborhood that's underserved. So working out that criteria. Yeah.
So I think it's amazing, and
Thank you.
Congratulations on getting this month's.
Thank you.
I'm also interested in, particularly since you've gone to these conferences and talked to a lot of other officials who have started these kinds of projects, and maybe in some cases are farther along. I am interested in some of the landmines that you're looking out for. We've talked about a couple of them in terms of keeping people engaged, if their projects weren't selected, and things like that. I'm just curious what you're also looking out for to make sure that we, do this right. And this was just alluded to. One thing that comes to mind is when you think about direct democracy and ballot initiatives, there's a downside to these things as well, and these processes can get co-opted, and sometimes it's be careful what you wish for. I'm just curious, what's going through your mind as you look at it?
Yeah, so there's definitely been some complaints about the process that I think we're going to have to be consistently, have consistent messaging and pushback on from residents about our first year. Anything that we do right has an element of politics involved. So people who just don't like me, don't like what the city is doing, are going to talk about how they don't like PB. One of the complaints that I've heard a lot recently during some of the candidate events that I've attended is that we shouldn't let 13-year-olds vote. We shouldn't let kids vote. They don't pay taxes. And I'm like, okay, but do we want them to grow up to be people who pay taxes? If we want to raise people to be able to lead, we have to trust them to lead. And having a vote in a process at 13, I'm not giving an inordinate amount of power, to my 13-year-old child by allowing them to vote in a PB process. But some of these arguments that I think people want to use just to undermine the process, and arguments about taxation, I think, can get a lot of traction with people because we have a really long tradition in this country of hatred of government and distrust of government. And so whenever you talk to people about taxes, there's just a little bit, there's a little bit of there. So it's easy to convince people oh, this isn't fair, in a way that relates to concerns about taxation. I think if we don't meet, if we hadn't met our goals in this first round, I think that we would have had a lot more outcry about it because we invested significantly. We invested about $300 and some thousand in the implementation process, the staff and the meetings and the overhead and getting all the work done, plus the 2.4 in the actual projects. The fact that we did meet our goals, though, I think sets this incredibly high standard for us to continue to get, if we said we got 10,000 voters in our first year, okay, well now we got to set a higher goal. Do we need 12 or 15,000 voters in our second year? If we implement half the projects in the first year, are people going to expect more and more? And if we can't continue to meet that standard, are people going to get disappointed and is faith in the project going to drop off? There are a couple of cities, Chicago, some of the wards in Chicago have been doing PD for over 10 years. New York is another city that's been doing it for a long time. So I think we have some opportunities to learn from them and think about how they've dealt with some of these challenges. The implementation year is something that we did as a response to some of those challenges because if you go straight into another cycle, it's really hard to just get stuff on the ground. The main difference that we have is that in those cities, the PB processes are implemented within city council districts or wards. And so there's just one person, your alderman or your council representative is the person who runs the whole thing. Their staff runs the process and it's their discretionary funding that goes into PB. So it's a lot smaller than what we have, even though a New York City Council ward is the size of half of Durham. Yeah. But you're only dealing with one person in one office versus an entire city government trying to implement all this stuff. So that's a little bit of a cautionary statement on how much we can draw from their experiences, but I think that there are some ways in which we can use them to make our process better. And there are some cities, like Greensboro, there's a city in California that do citywide PB processes every year that we can learn from. But yeah, it's in any political process, there's going to be disaffected people who will either who will argue, and whether that's in good faith or not, it can be compelling to other residents. So we have to have our narrative about why we think this program is great, why we believe it's a success, and why we should continue doing it as part of like the political conversation that I'm having with residents.
Just as a follow-on to that, now that you've done one round of this, do you see PB as, a longer-term thing in the city of Durham? Is it here to stay? And then one additional question I have is, in having gone through this process, was there a thing or two that took you by surprise?
So we have $2.4 million for PB projects programmed into our long-term plan for every 2 years indefinitely. So as long as the council stays supportive, the process will continue. Now, of course, we have a council election every 2 years, so there's always a chance that future council members won't want to do it and it'll get cut. Once people are used to a thing, like once it gets institutionalized, it's harder to take away. So it would be hard. I think it will be harder for future council members to be like, let me take away this this $2.4 million bucket that you all get to directly decide on. Kind of like how we can't get rid of Obamacare, right? Like nobody actually wants something that they've been given, then taken away from them. So I think that will be a strong argument in favor of keeping it, but of course there are no guarantees. Things that took me by surprise. I think I was surprised by like the quality of some of the objections, I'll say, and like the vehemence of those objections, which I would argue were not actually based in reality. So just like a lot of, I don't even know if I want to call it misunderstanding, because I don't think that people were actually misunderstanding. I think they were making a political argument against PB. And I think in a lot of cases, those arguments were not very good. I think there are really good political arguments against PB. Things like the competitive nature of the process can alienate people. Issues around like, are we just allowing the people who already have the most access to the vote to decide to put things into their communities? There are really good political critiques of direct democracy. And is direct democracy really actually democracy? Or is like the representation piece something that a filter that we really need to filter out fringe ideas or whatever. We did have one person submit. We had a couple of people submit like really crazy ideas that we filtered out, right? So I think there are a lot of good political arguments. Oh, like shouldn't the city just be doing this on their own? Why are we asking residents to like put in all this work so that the city fixes their roads or their parks or their bus shelters, right? Like those are all good arguments. I think I was surprised by the number and like tenor of the really bad arguments against it. Especially given that there are a lot of good arguments that I've been, that I've had to do a lot of public narrative work to be like, but let's try it, and this is what we can do to address that. There's just been some haters. Yeah, and I think that was surprising. Because who doesn't want more democracy, right? But yeah, people don't. There's people who don't want more democracy. Yeah. You. And
for these projects, were these all, this is more of a question about implementation, are these all things that can be carried out by city staff? Or are you contracting some of these projects out? And if you are contracting, how do you do that in terms of bidding and making sure there's not crossover on something that's set online?
Yeah, a little of both. So a lot of them can be done by city staff. Anything that can't be done by city staff will be contracted out using the same kind of city contracting process that we usually do, which is subject to some pretty strict state laws. So any construction contract, we have to go with the lowest responsive bidder. And then services contracts are not as restricted, but there are still some legal restrictions on those. We thought about cost overruns. There's a little bit of contingency built into every project budget. So that was kind of taken out of each project at the beginning. It's like, okay, add in a 10% contingency for that. But if we go over that, then we have to figure out how to make that work in our overall capital improvement budget. We have some finance wizards of the city who kind of just make magic happen. So I'm confident that we'll be able to find that. Another question we had kind of about the ongoing cost was about maintenance. So like if you're gonna put in a bus shelter, it's not just the cost of pouring the concrete and putting the thing up, you also have maintenance over time. We decided not to put the maintenance costs in the budget because we couldn't really figure out a reasonable time frame for like a permanent piece of infrastructure. But we asked the departments to think about long-term maintenance costs when it went through vetting to make sure that they thought that those costs were not going to be undue burden on their budgets going forward. Yeah.
I was wondering if there are any attempts to like extend the emphasis on equity that is present in PB to like council elections.
Oh, interesting. Not really. So council elections are governed by a much stricter set of laws given down from the state. So something that I would really love to do is give non-citizen residents the right to vote in municipal elections, and this has happened in a couple of cities in California and in Massachusetts, but we can't do that in North Carolina. It's like banned by the state. And we have a lot of things that we would really like to do that are banned by the state of North Carolina. North Carolina is one of the worst states for local preemption. We have one of the worst general assemblies in terms of passing laws that take power away from local governments. So, there are just restrictions on that. I think there are some places where they've also allowed like 16-year-olds to vote in municipal elections, but I can't think where, but I feel like I've heard of that. But yeah, we can't do any of that. So PB is an opportunity for us to broaden the electorate, so to speak, by having this internal city process. But we can't really, we don't really have the option to do it for our council elections. Yeah.
Can you just give us some like overview of the projects that won, maybe from like the large to small ones?
Yeah. So I think the biggest project that won was technology for the schools. There was a project to build a youth center at our local LGBTQ center. A project won to do bus shelters in a bunch of different neighborhoods with public art. There was the public art project on Fayetteville Street, the historical markers. There was a STEM education project that won, a community garden project at a local Latino health organization, accessible ramps for low-income habitat owners who are disabled. I know there's more, but that's what I can think of offhand. If you go online to the PD Durham website, there's a list of all the projects that won too. But yeah, the schools, the bigger infrastructure things, projectors, bus shelters, those are kind of the big ones. And I think there was a parks project that went too. There were a lot of parks projects on the ballot, but a lot of them were really big, and so a lot of them didn't win because people didn't want to like spend $600,000 of their $800,000 in one spot. So that's something we're going to think about for the next cycle is can we break some of those up so it's like a partial renovation of a park and then a partial of another park rather than having projects that were that big. We set a minimum of $50,000, but the maximum was like the maximum budget of the award. So we bringing that down to like $300,000 or $400,000 so that we don't use up all the money on anything.
And they're, so like Jillian said, they're all on PD Durham if you Google that, and they're also listed by ward.
No one knows what ward they live in. That was the other challenge we had, but we were able to get maps out to people so we could figure it out.
Did you have a question?
Yeah. So I'm more interested, this is a broader question, but I mean, you came to Duke, you decided to stay in Durham, and now you're actively involved in the council. So I'm just wondering, how have you seen civic engagement evolve or grow or just change in general in Durham, and what do you see for the future?
Yeah, so things have changed a whole lot in the 20 years that I've been here. This is my 20th anniversary in Durham. I keep meaning to throw myself a party, but I haven't done it yet. So gentrification has really changed the landscape of Durham in a very intense way, I would say, over the last 10 years especially. When I came to Duke, I don't think I ever went downtown in the 4 years that I was here. The stuff at Brightleaf Square, kind of right on the edge of downtown, people would walk to from East Campus, like Shooters was there, right? And like those bars like where the Federal and the James Joyce's, like, and across at Brightleaf, those were there, but further into downtown was just like people who worked for the city or the county. or like the library, right? Like there was very little retail or or even office outside of like those government buildings. Duke and some private industry, like the Capital Broadcasting, which is owned by the Goodman family, who's like a prominent business family in town, and the city all decided to put a lot of money and energy and time into downtown revitalization. And that kicked off a wave of private investment, which then kicked off a wave of gentrification, and now that's kind of where we're at. The city kind of did all of that at a time where there was a lot less civic engagement, and where I think government was a lot less open and transparent. Over the last, I want to say 6 to 8 years, I've seen a lot more engagement in the city government. Both, I think some of it, so for the last 3 to 4 years, I think a lot of it is that people are seeing really negative political climates at the national and the state level, and so they're trying to figure out how they can get involved and what they can do. And so local government feels like a good way to get engaged and make a difference. And so we're getting, we get like 24 applications for one position on board or commission sometimes, right? Which is awesome that so many people want it, but it's exhausting because I'm reading 100 pages worth of applications for one seat. We've seen a lot more, like voter turnout has gone up a little bit every year. We're not sure what's going to happen this year. In our last election, we had a competitive mayoral election for the first time in a long time. And so that really boosted turnout. We're not sure what we're going to see this election, like whether that boost will keep up or whether people will kind of not be as excited if they're not voting for a new mayor. So I think overall we're on an upward trend. And that's related a lot to the attitude of the city to residents. We're doing a lot more, trying to do like Spanish language access and engagement and reach out more to Spanish-speaking residents. We have started a couple of new boards. We're trying to increase diversity on the boards. Social media has played a role, so electing younger council members. When I ran for office, I was the youngest person, so there was no one on council who was less than 20 years younger or older than me. When I was elected, me and one other person were elected at the same time, and I was 10 years younger than him, and he was 10 years younger than anyone else. And we both use social media a lot, and so we now have access to like different kinds of people, younger people. Then in the next year, we elected 3 more people who are in their like mid-30s to mid-40s. We're also more active on social media. So that I think has opened up government a little bit more to just ordinary residents to kind of see what's going on. Of course, there are equity issues with that because people who are more likely to get social media are also people who are more likely to have money. We did a survey recently and found out that though our boards and commissions, we've achieved, over the last couple of years, we've achieved racial parity and gender parity with our population, we still have a widely disproportionate number of people who report incomes over $75,000 a year, which is about our median income. So we have lots and lots of people above and not very many people who are lower income. And so that's a big disparity that we need to figure out how to fix. So I would say there's more engagement. Things are, going in that direction, but we still face a lot of issues and concerns with like who we're engaging and how we're engaging them and wanting to do that more effectively. Yeah.
I just had a question about more generally Durham's local government situation. I'm from Boston, so for most of my life, I assume that all cities had very strong mayors and they had a lot of executive power. Then we went to college in Hartford, found out it wasn't always the case. So I'm just wondering, city manager is like the chief executive essentially. The mayor position is mostly ceremonial, or like where his powers?
So I'm part of a national network of progressive local elected officials called Local Progress, and so I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of electeds from different cities and different kinds of governments over the last 4 years. And there is an amazing amount of variety out there to the point that like it blows your mind a little bit. I met some people this summer who call themselves selectors. They're like the county select, and so they're like the county selectmen and selectwomen, and like I have no idea where this word came from. And like, what are your powers? But yeah, here in Durham we have this council manager system. The way I describe it to people is it's kind of like a nonprofit board and an executive director. So Steve is like the chair of the board, we're the board, and then Tom Bonfield, our city manager, is the executive director who then hires and manages the staff. The mayor's role, the mayor has a couple of formal powers that the council doesn't have. He can set agendas for meetings, chairs the meetings, and he has roles on specific boards. So like there's a board that meets that's like the top 2 elected and 1 appointed officials from the city, county, and school board all meet together. So the mayor has like a formal role on that. He makes appointments to the boards and commissions that we serve on and that we serve as liaisons to. So there's some formal power there. He has a vote as a council member. Some cities, like in Charlotte, the mayor doesn't even vote. So in that space, I'm like it's confusing to figure out what kind of power the mayor might hold. But what I found is the mayor's largest sense of authority is that the mayor can really set the agenda for what the council is doing and how we're moving. And the mayor has a lot of informal authority in the community and in the city. When Bill Bell was the mayor, right? If Bill Bell didn't like it, staff would kind of just slow walk it. The mayor has that level of authority through those sort of informal political power, spaces. So I'm the mayor pro tem. When he is out of town, I get to sign forms. So that's a little
You make it sound so exciting.
Yeah, it's great. I get to sign things over to people. But yeah, I think in general there is a tendency there's definitely a tendency by city staff and city management and community at large to kind of follow the mayor's lead. So he does have that leadership authority. The fact that Bill Bell was not excited about participatory budgeting made I chose to not make it an issue in the budget cycle. That was the budget cycle before he left, because I felt that as we got new council members in, getting those folks on board, knowing that Bill Bell was going to retire, it wasn't worth having that fight, because I knew that there was going to be a lot of political pushback. A majority of the council wasn't excited about it anyway, but even if a majority of the council had been excited about it, having the mayor not excited about it was going to be unnecessary work, and it wasn't going to, and we weren't going to win it. So I think the mayor has some authority that it's hard to pin down, but you can definitely feel it when you're working in this space. Yeah.
I think that'd be the last question, if that's okay.
Last question.
This is going to stray off some, I don't know if I should ask it or not, but about gentrification.
Yeah.
So I know that the city council is very progressive in comparison to a lot of city councils.
Yeah.
But the state kind of barred you from doing a lot of progressive things, especially with zoning. So I was wondering what your kind of vision as city council is moving forward, trying to approach gentrification.
Yeah. So the only thing that we can really do, I believe, to make a dent is to publicly subsidize and publicly provide affordable housing. We have very little success getting developers to contribute because we're not allowed to legally mandate that they contribute any affordable housing or even contribute money to our fund. So it's there are some developers who will give us small amounts of money just as goodwill, as goodwill donations. But if they don't want to, you can't make them. It's it's squeezing blood out of a rock. We're not going to get it, and the amount of time and energy we put into it is not worth it. We can't pass, there's laws in other states around inclusionary zoning and rent control or rent stabilization. We can't pass any of those policies. So I think the only effective thing that we can do, right, is do things like pass this $95 million housing bond that's on the ballot this year and use that money to directly subsidize affordable housing. We're also, a chunk of that money is going to the Durham Housing Authority, and our housing authority communities need significant investments that the city and the housing authority are going to have to figure out how to provide, because the federal government has basically decided that they are not going to be in the public housing business anymore. For the last 30 years, they haven't been giving housing authorities enough money to really keep up their units. And so the conditions in public housing, not just in Durham, but everywhere in the country, continue to decline. And now it's kind of up to cities to figure out where this investment is going to come from, so that we don't lose a significant piece of the affordable housing that we have in the city. We continue, like we have a legislative agenda that's kind of like our lobbying agenda to the General Assembly, and we continue to put things like inclusionary zoning and rent control on that agenda. Given the makeup of the General Assembly currently, we don't anticipate those moving anywhere, but elections happen, and so there's a possibility that as we move forward, if we're able to get some more progressive folks at the state level, that we can take a look at that. But housing is a crisis in Durham. It's a crisis in every major city in the country, and in a lot of cities around the world. Like Barcelona has a housing crisis. I was walking around, with some of their elected officials, and they were talking about gentrification, and how people are being pushed out of the center city, and how expensive it is to live there. People are living in very small spaces, and they still can't afford them. Like Barcelona was built very differently than Durham, right? We have a lot of sprawl. They have density, and it's still unaffordable. So we need a national solution to the problem. But in the meantime, we can build as much affordable housing as we can and keep it affordable permanently. All right, last question. Thank you all so much. Don't forget to vote.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Early voting for the primary starts tomorrow. You can register and vote at the same time.